Hi, Joe Cerrone.
Al Rosen.
Welcome to CAD 134, Basic AutoCAD for Interior Design, and our weekly class Zoom meeting. Module 7. This week we'll work on Module 7, which is dimensioning and area calculations. Lab 7A is composed of this floor plan in which we will calculate the room areas and populate this table with the correct room sizes. Lab 7 or Chapter 7 also talks about dimensioning and dimensioning styles, which we'll talk a little bit about today as well. So the student file is located right here. You can click on Lab 7A and open it. And then once it's open, you'll have a screen like this. And in order to calculate out the room areas, what we'll do is we'll go to this area of the ribbon and we choose the area command. And so if we select the area command, and then we want to do this in model space. So I'm going to switch over to model space, which will probably blow my command out, but that's all right. So as we look at this, we're going to go and we're going to say measure area. And then what we'll do is we'll have our O snaps on and we'll select the corners. And it depends how specific you want. Let's say that we're putting in some very expensive tile and we want to know exactly how much we need. So I'll go around that little feature right there. That would probably be a beam. And I'll go to here and then I'll hit enter. And it tells me the area for that is 304 square feet for the president's office. So what I would do then after I have calculated that out is I would go in here, and I find it easier to just copy the text and edit it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to copy this text. Actually, it looks like it's a table, so I can just double click in that. And so I'll say 304 square feet, green check mark. And I'm not sure why I've got all these zeros on it, Al. Maybe you can help me with the formatting. Let's see here. We'll come back to that. Live TV is a little difficult to do that. We've got a few too many decimal places, but I'm sure we can go to our properties on that.
Go to units. Go to units and adjust them units. The dimension styles. That's all.
So I'll just dial down the precision down
Right
to here.
Yep.
And that should take care of it. So properties is a very powerful command. It does all the properties of whatever command it is that you're running. And if we come back down here to office number 1, we can go to our utilities, our measure command, area calculation. And we find that we have 162, we'll call it 163 square feet. That's funny because it didn't do anything on that one with the zeros. That was unusual. If you hit the F2 key, it'll give you your last command back. And so I forgot what my square footage was, 163. And so I hit the F2 key, and then we'll come back here. I'm just going to leave it at that for right now because we're glitching a little bit. Some other applications where perhaps you have something that's not square and you need to calculate that out. So if we had a circular space, and then let's go in here and let's just add some other geometry to it. And then we'll trim that. So if you have a shape like this, and you need to calculate out the area of this, what you want to do is you want to either turn it into a region or a closed polyline. I like the p-edit command, polyline edit. And so what I'll do is I'll select this shape and I'll hit enter, and then I'll say join, and then I'll join it to this shape and hit enter. And now I have one continuous boundary shape. And when I calculate the area with this, I'll use area, down arrow, object, and then I'll select the object. It'll tell me what the area of that would be, 450.4. So you can work with some other shapes that aren't necessarily going to allow you to go from corner to corner. All right. So that's a quick rundown on Lab 7A. It's not super difficult. Here's our textbook information. If we look at our objectives, we're going to look at working with dimensioning variables, dimension styles, and then the following commands, which are basically just dimension commands. We'll look at revision clouds, and these are how your managers are going to mark up your prints for you to make changes to it. So for example, if we were back in our drawing here and we wanted to do something here in the conference room, typically I'll go to a different layer. I'm just going to choose one of these red colored layers. And then on the annotate tab, we have the revision cloud. And when you use the revision cloud, you want to look at the command line and look at the arc length. And so if I click on arc length, it tells me that the arc length is 1 foot, which is pretty big. And so that's the minimum arc length, and then the maximum length is 1 foot. So let's see if I make that 2 feet so that we have some puffiness to our revision cloud. And then let's say I want to put a revision cloud here. That's not bad. And so we can add a revision cloud, and we can maybe say something about this door detail. Maybe we have to have an ADA compliant door handle on there or something like that. We could certainly mark that up. Other things you can do when we go into drawing and annotating drawings is working with things like multi-leaders, where we can come in here and we can put a leader out here and then say something about the drawing that we want to mark up. These are tied to the dimension style. So as you see, it's really tiny. But if I go into my dimension style and I modify that for my multi-leader, what I can do is I can adjust the dim scale on that. And so here's my specific scale at 1. And typically architectural drawings will be 4, 8, 16, 24. So let's go with 16. We'll okay that, close it. That's a little big. Let's go back to our dim scale, cut that number in half. And we can also change the leader format to a spline. They look softer. There we go. So just some basic dimensioning applications. Back to the main splash page. And here's the chapter. I'm going to download it. And open it. So as we look at chapter 7, we're looking at these dimension variables, things like the area command, calculations. And then most of these are just quick ways to dimension things. And so when we look at these basic types of dimensions, linear dimensions are straight line dimensions. Aligned dimensions would go at an angle to whatever they're parallel to. We really don't do much with arc lengths. As long as I've been working with CAD, I haven't done much with it, depending on what type of work you do. You might, if you're doing sheet metal type work with something like that. Ordinal is more of a machinist type thing, manufacturing, where you have a program 0 on the part, and then everything is programmed from that or dimensioned from that. And then these are pretty straightforward with circular dimensions. And so there's a number of dimension variables, and typically what happens is your CAD manager will set all of these dim variables up for you in your drawing title block. And then you'll have a dimension style that you'll be able to use. And so if we look at creating a dimension style for our tenant space floor plan, and we're going to use this plan throughout the class. Next week, we're going to introduce a bigger part of it where we're putting furniture with blocks and attributes in it. But we could go through and we could create the dimensions for this as well. And so if I were to take a look at this and start dimensioning it, I can dimension these variables that are shown here on the drawing. Switching back to AutoCAD.
And Joe,
Yes, sir.
go up where it says home on the top ribbon, please. Yeah. And you see where it says draw? Click the arrow down, please. And you will see the revision right there in the bottom corner of the right-hand side. There's an arrow there. There you go.
Right.
So that way you can do that also at the same time.
Oh, nice. So we could say, change this to Al's office.
Whatever.
Unless you'd like to be the president.
No, too much paperwork.
I prefer to be number 1 or number 2 myself. Number 2. All right. So as we're looking at dimension styles, what we're talking about here would be under the annotation tab. And then as you work with your dimension styles and your dimensioning in the scale factors, the easiest way to work with dimension styles, and I think we ought to just show them how to do it in Paperspace, don't you think, Al?
Fantastic idea.
Is while you're in Paperspace, you go into the viewport and you need to set up the viewport for the proper scale. So I'm going to just go to a separate page of it. And so I have a bigger viewport here. If I double click in here, I have 3/16 of an inch equals a foot. And what you can do with your dimensioning style is you can create a dimension style that will automatically create a dimension within there for the viewport of the scale of the title block. And so I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to go with my standard and I'm going to say new. And I'm going to say Joe's dimension style. And I'm going to say continue. We're not going to use annotative dimensioning. Annotative depths and changes depending on the viewports. It's a little complicated. When we get into our dimension style, this is all pretty much boilerplate stuff where I can go into my line styles and I can say symbols and arrows. I want to have obliquing text down here. My text height, I can say I want a text height of, let's say, 0.125 or 1/8 of an inch. And then I can go into my fit tab. And this is where you want to check this off for scale dimension to layout. And this will keep everything from being really tiny. What it'll do is it'll take that 1/8 of an inch and multiply it by a scale factor so that it's the right size. When it prints out, it'll print out at 1/8 of an inch text height. But in order to do that, we have to scale it up so that it's visible within the drawing. Primary units, we use architectural. Great. And so back to, we'll say okay. And that's Joe's dimensioning style. I'll set it current. And let me do one other thing. I like to make the text, instead of using a standard text style let's use something that looks a little bit more like handwritten drawing. And City Blueprint looks like handwritten drawing. I don't know why they called it City Blueprint. Oh, they have Country Blueprint now too. Well, let's go under City Blueprint. So City Blueprint has kind of a hand look to it. We'll get rid of the annotative on it and we'll set it current and we'll say yes and we'll close it. And then we'll use this City Blueprint for this standard style and we'll okay it. And that's going to be under Joe's dimensioning style. We'll close it. And then when we come in here to do our dimensioning, if I come in under the annotate tab and I want to create a linear dimension, I can go and click here and I can click here and I can place that dimension. Now I want to make sure my viewport is locked before I zoom in. If it's not locked, then the viewport scale will change. And then you can just work within the viewport. And so I can come in here with another linear dimension and I can say from here to here. And there's a number of other things that we can do with dimensioning. That's a basic dimension style and how we would go and set that up. And then the textbook goes through a number of other ways to go through and set up these dimension styles and dimension style overrides. But from a standpoint of the best way to do it is to set it up as a viewport scale. And so just a quick review here. What you do is you set up the viewport scale. And so let's say I did another page of this. Let's say copy, move or copy. And I'll make a copy and I'll say move it to the end and I'll say okay. And this will give me another tab here. And then what I'll do is I'll go into the viewport, I'll unlock it and I'll change the scale to, let's go with 1/8 of an inch, something a little bit smaller. I'll lock it. And then when I go and I use the dimensions, since they're set to be scaled to the viewport, all I need to do is dimension it. And so I can come in here and put my dimensions on. And then when that prints, that will print at the proper text height on the printed page for my dimension scale. So if I look at my text height, and that's really the game, you don't want it to look like a Frankenstein where everybody's, mismatched. You want it to look standardized. So the text height will print at 1/8 of an inch height since I set up my fit tab to be scale dimensions to layout. And that's a good technique to use on your dimensioning. All right. So Chapter 7 just goes through and covers information about dimensioning and different dimensioning techniques. But overall, what we want to do is we want to come up with our president's office, and we want to calculate out the area for each of the rooms. If you want to dimension it, we'll treat that as bonus, but we will not require you to put dimensions on the text. All right, with that, I'm going to come back to the main splash page and start wrapping up our Zoom meeting. We're planning on giving the midterm on November 2nd. And so we'll be putting that in our post for our announcements. The test will be midterm. It'll have questions from the end of the chapter and a hands-on drawing. And next week we'll go over that. And the other thing that we're going to do is we have also released Module 9. We're going to skip Module 8. Module 8 is an elevation drawing for some cabinets for this conference room, which we can incorporate later. But what we'd like to do is to move into Module 9. And in Module 9, I'll just give you a quick look. We're going to go through and we're going to create this. We're going to create this drawing here with the furniture, with blocks and attributes and dimensions. And what we'll be able to do is populate that room with all the attributes. We can turn off the attributes, ATTDISP. so we can see what the furniture looks like without the attributes. And then we'll be able to generate a bill of material that'll list all the furniture within that office plan. And so that's going to be a good sized project that we'll be releasing. All right. So Al will update the announcements and the dimensions in the announcements page. We'll put that the midterm is going to be November 2nd. Next week, we'll review for the midterm and we'll release module 9. With that, I'm going to end the Zoom meeting and open things up for questions.